into
We're
work every
close.
day.
Huh?
You know, when you come into work every day, it's different.
I don't think so.
No, it is, because you don't have a fridge right around the corner, you know, you finish up some task, you know, you get there and go, oh, I'm gonna treat
Agree.
myself.
Lock it.
Bring food from home.
I would agree with that if the bakery wasn't on my way here.
Right.
Oh.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, whenever I visited my daughter in San Francisco, Bodine's Bakery was just right out the back gate of her complex. I mean, back gate, turn left, there it was.
You can smell it from her apartment.
Oh, dangerous. Okay, we ready?
I think so.
And call this regularly scheduled meeting of the Twin Palms Planning Commission to order. And pledge of allegiance. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call.
Chairman Doza,
Present.
let the record show that Vice Chair Pahana and Commissioner Walker have excused absences. Commissioner Dixon,
Here.
Commissioner Krushat,
Here.
These proceedings may be viewed on demand at the City of 29 Palms website, www.29palms.org. You may also live stream this meeting by going on the city website and clicking on the meeting agendas link. Public comments. This is the time for the public to address the Planning Commission on issues within the jurisdiction of the Commission that are not on this agenda. All comments are to be directed to the Chair of the Commission and shall not consist of any personal attacks. Members of the public are expected to maintain a professional and courteous decorum during their comments. There's a time limitation. You have 3 minutes per person. If you haven't already done so, please fill out name and address slips and give them to the Planning Commission Secretary. Planning Commission is prohibited by the Brown Act from taking action or discussing at length items not included on the printed agenda. Public comments on specific agenda items will be deferred until consideration of the item on the agenda. Commission comments and reports of meetings attended. Jason?
I have not attended any meetings.
Jim?
I have not attended any meetings.
Nor have I. Consent calendar, approval of the minutes of June 2nd, 2020. Does anybody have any additions, corrections, or deletions from the minutes?
I move we accept the minutes as drafted and presented to this body.
Motion?
I second.
Motion and a second. Further discussion? Roll call vote.
Chairman Doza,
Aye.
Commissioner Dixon,
Aye.
Commissioner Krushat,
Aye.
3-0 approved.
We have no items removed from the consent calendar. Public hearings, PC 2019, Development Code Amendment for Trash Enclosure Standards. And I'll turn this over to our illustrious planning director, Travis Clark.
I'm feeling illustrious today, actually. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. The purpose of this Development Code Amendment is to comply with AB 1826, Organics Recycling Law. And actually a whole host of ABs and SBs that come before it, which we're catching up on now. So this law mandates businesses recycle landscape cuttings and food waste, depending on the amount of waste they generate per week. And just a little way of background here, January 1, 2019 is when we were supposed to have anybody with 4 cubic yards or more of any type of solid commercial waste to comply with this new state law. Since that time, there's been a formal review of all jurisdictions. We got our audit about 2 to 3 weeks ago from the state. They'll go back and look at all of those numbers, see how well we're doing. I did talk to Eli earlier. One of the problems that we do have is contamination of our recyclables in the city, which is pretty high. So we need to work on additional educational campaigns to help bring that down. The next goalpost is if the state has not achieved 50% waste reduction goals to 2014 levels, then that requirement tightens up to 2 cubic yards per week. So obviously, we're trying to get ahead of this and put in the right standards to help us comply going forward. Just a little bit about what is meant by organics, because it means different things in different parts of the country, but here in California, it includes all food waste, landscape trimmings, that includes leaves, grasses, trimmings, branches, stumps, non-hazardous wood waste, in other words, wood that's not been treated, and compostable paper. An example of that would be the pizza box, which is soiled, shouldn't go in the recyclables, but can go into the organics bin. And you can see it makes up a pretty big percentage of the waste stream. So that's why the state is trying to encourage and mandate us to move more towards doing better at organics recycling. So we took a look at our current standards, which are called trash storage facilities, and just the name itself is not really appropriate, so we're suggesting that it be renamed trash enclosure standards. Obviously, it's not a place we want to store trash for a long time. Our current standards are out of compliance with the state in several regards. First of all, they do not contain space for either a recycling or an organics bin. So we're catching up on the recycling bin part as well as implementing the organics bin part. They currently do not meet ADA requirement for access. And I know that seems kind of strange, but according to state law, even the trash bin enclosures have to meet ADA, meaning the travel path to the enclosures need to meet ADA as well as access in the bins, around the bins themselves. So we took that standard, actually made the access in the back wider so that it is wheelchair accessible. And then we also wanted to clarify when these are needed for multifamily residential, because there's a little bit of confusion between what state law considers as a commercial use versus our ordinance. And under state law, anything that's 5 units or more is considered a commercial use, a complex. Anything with 5 units or less is not, and so you would use your standard plastic bin containers for those properties. So that is in our new draft development code amendment. So where do these standards apply? Any new projects, so that's commercial, industrial, office, multifamily of 5 units or more. And then consistent with other parts of our code, when you have to make upgrades to the site, it would apply where an existing structure is expended 25% or more in square feet, or with regards to multifamily, there's been a 25% increase in units. So those are 2 thresholds where you would need to bring up the trash enclosures to standard. And then we also added, just to make sure we're complying with the state, any building that's converted to a restaurant use, because obviously they're going to produce organic waste where there were none before, or anything such as like a grocery store type of use would need an organics waste bin. Some exemptions from organic waste, businesses that would be able to document that they don't produce organics waste, and so we have a great example right now in the O'Reilly's Auto Parts. Obviously an auto parts store is not going to produce organic waste, so they're claiming an exemption and we would grant it for that type of use. So our proposed standards, like I say, do have ADA access to the bins, including path of travel. It's still a requirement for a block wall for commercial uses, and we're using the same language that we did before about being compatible with the architectural detail of the primary structure. For example, let's say the building is stucco, ideally the trash enclosure would have a stucco finish on it as well. But we did want to provide an option because we know that these things can be costly, especially for smaller residential projects. So we have a second standard for residential projects that are 5 to 19 units. That is a wood stockade fence option. And if constructed well, they will hold up, to the use. More than 19 units, that's a fairly sizable multifamily complex, and so we would revert back to the block wall construction. And then I have in here variations may be approved by the community development director due to site conditions or constraints. We do have situations where, you know, it's just impossible to say fit them side by side on an existing site, but maybe they could be fitted in tandem or in an L shape, Y shape, some other configuration which meets the intent of the ordinance, but allows it to be constructed given the site conditions. So we asked our engineer to revise our standards. This is what you see here before you. So this is, you know, kind of a typical layout of your trash enclosures. This is the block wall here, one bin for trash, one bin for recyclables, each 4 cubic yards, and then an area for your organics here, which are typically, again, the plastic bins. And then, as mentioned, ADA access around this standard is made so that it can be expanded if it's a really a use that produces a lot of waste. Let's say a large grocery store, then it can be expanded and recyclable and trash bins can just be repeated. And then this would be a standard without the organics. Same thing for a stockade fence option. Same layout, the only difference is here is it's a stockade fence barrier and gate as opposed to the block wall. So with that, we do recommend approval of the Development Code Amendment for the trash enclosure standards and to find that this project is category exempt from CEQA per section 15301. And I am happy to answer any questions about trash you may have. And also Eli is here. He is our, I want to say, trash guru. He's actually been coordinating a lot of the efforts with the city and Cal Recycle. Can give you any updates that you may require there. Most of you probably know the transfer station at Yucca Valley is under development. And once it's completed, it would, you know, greatly reduce the time, obviously, to get recyclables to that facility as opposed to where they go now. But like I said, one of the things we do have to approve on as a city is cleaning up the contamination in our current recyclables.
Any questions from staff or for staff?
Okay, I have a real quick one, and I just want to be clear in case I ever get this question.
Okay.
When we described under materials and construction, we describe a 6-foot high wall of 8-inch block construction or similar permanent construction on 3 sides, and then it goes on to talk about stucco. Are we talking about if somebody builds a lumber frame and wire structure and then covers it with stucco? That's the equivalent of using the 8-inch block construction?
Well, it would have to meet whatever the building code standards is.
Oh,
for
okay.
that. Yeah.
All right. So when we say stucco, we're talking about,
That's typically what's happened. That happened with Starbucks. I think
Yeah.
with their
Okay.
enclosure, they basically used standard block and then stucco.
yeah, and then they stuccoed the standard block. So
Right.
but you can't stucco a frame of a wall.
Right.
We want something as solid as,
Right.
oh, okay.
But we would look at alternatives. For example, even in the back of this facility, we use the Adobe style slump stone.
Okay.
So we would look at any other type of materials that, met the intent of being a solid barrier.
Okay, no more questions. Thank you.
Jason?
I have no questions.
Just real quick from me, roughly or briefly, what is the procedure that is in place for recycling the greens?
I'm
Where does
sorry?
it go?
Say again?
The organic waste?
Okay. I think this is, Eli, we may need you here. I'll try, but if I say something incorrect, Eli will correct me. It's my understanding that our organic waste will go to the Yucca Valley Transfer Station once it's completed. And then from there, it would go to the Eden Hill composting facility once that's completed. Where it goes now, Eli would be better able to tell you.
Currently, our organic waste, if we had it, would be transferred to Coachella Valley composting. So it's about 90 miles each way. So the reduction, which is why the proposed rates were about $400 a month per business. So we chose to not enforce 1826 right now until that comes down when these new facilities open.
Okay. All right, that answers my question.
Yeah, and I would add one thing. I think the model that we're using in Project Phoenix with the collective trash enclosures, it will help a lot in many ways. One, it will just eliminate, these dumpsters and trash enclosures everywhere, consolidate them for easier pickup, and it's just, more sightly to have them all in one location and less costly to the businesses. So that may be a model we'll want to look at in other places in downtown and other commercial areas.
Excellent. Another question, staff? Open the public hearing. Does anybody wish to comment on this large crowd we have? Having no request to speak, I'm going to close the public hearing, bring it back up to here for discussion. Jim?
I have no further questions or. I'm
Jason?
good.
I have no further questions as well.
I have none. Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion that we approve the Development Code Amendment for trash enclosure standards and find the project category exempt under CEQA per 15301.
I second.
Have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Dixon?
Aye.
Commissioner Cruciat?
Aye.
Chair Mendoza?
Aye.
3-0 approved.
Okay, discussion and potential action items. Any? We'll move on to Community Development Director updates.
Okay, thank you. I do have a few, but before I started, I kind of want to run an interpretation before you. This situation is coming up more and more in our vacation home rental applications. So the question is, would a duplex separated by a carport but with a shared roof covering both structures qualify for vacation home rental use? Here's the way the code reads presently. Vacation home rental use shall be limited to only those dwelling units that are physically separate, standalone, single-family residential units not attached to or sharing a common wall with other residential unit being considered for the vacation home rental. So we've had this question come up a couple of times. And in one case, which we recently let go through the process, it was a separately constructed home, and it was a separately constructed garage that had been later converted to like an accessory dwelling unit with open breezeway in between. They came back later and covered the breezeway, but they were two physically separate buildings. And so that one's currently going through the process, I believe. And then we had a situation like this come up where it's a duplex that was obviously constructed as one structure. They're physically separate, except there is a kind of a shared wood wall in the back with some utility closet there. If you read strict reading of the code, being physically separate, they're not technically because they have a shared roof, and they are attached to each other, but they do not share a common wall. So this is one of the things that we're wrestling with. We get this question. Shelley gets it pretty often, and we just want to make sure that we're consistent in how we apply the code and get your thoughts and opinions on this question.
I thought we had amended the code to where a duplex, even with a shared common wall, one unit could be used as a vacational rental provided that the other was the owner or the agent.
We had not.
We did not do that.
We did not do that. It got to council, and I think there was a lot of concern from council and certainly from staff, is how do you police that owner living there?
Okay.
And it's the same situation with accessory dwelling units, which is why we're changing that part of the code. you know, how do you enforce that that's really going to happen,
Okay.
given that people move away, people pass away? You know, I know some cities actually put, you know, covenants or record things in their title. That just seems like a lot of administrative burden to overtake for situations like this. So right now, we've been saying, you know, vacation home rentals do not apply in multifamily situations, particularly the shared walls. Obviously, it makes sense. If you've got two, then you're going to hear the noise or activity from the adjoining unit a lot easier than you would if they're separate. But you will recall recently we had an appeal where we had two structures on the same parcel. However, they were physically separated, and,
Right.
and that went through. So this is kind of that situation in between.
But in this situation you're talking about, we're not talking about a shared load-bearing wall as we're talking, or I don't know, if it doesn't have to be load-bearing, but a shared wall between two living spaces.
We're not talking about a shared
It's,
wall.
when you talked about the wall, this was they could be standalone structures if that wall was removed.
And the roof. Would have to be
Well, you got the
too.
roofing that's connecting them.
Yeah, that's.
But the way the code is written now, it's a shared wall, it doesn't
And
designate
not
whether.
attached.
Well, but it does say physically separate
Mm-hmm.
and not attached. So those two things kind of
So
describe.
now we have, they don't have a shared wall, but they're physically attached because of a roof.
That's correct.
That's where
Yes.
we're at.
Yeah.
To clarify that with another code, when we built my mother-in-law's casita, we connected it with a roof, so that's a breezeway. So that made it an addition rather than a new structure
Mm-hmm.
Right.
because of the roof.
Right.
So the way I read this,
You could not,
what?
go ahead, I'm sorry.
The way I read this is if they are connected by a roof, they're connected and it can't be done, can't be
Right,
used.
and you could not rent the casita out
No.
as a VROB?
No,
Okay, that's the way I understand it too.
Okay.
And so is there an issue with that?
No, I just want to make sure this is the correct interpretation, because like I said,
I
we
believe
had
that's the
that
correct interpretation.
special
Yes.
situation where they were two separate structures. It was a VHR. She came back later and connected the breezeway, but there's still two physically, separate ones. This is a different situation, and this was all constructed as one building
Yes,
with a shared roof, so. Okay, all right.
Okay.
Just want to make sure we're on the right path.
okay.
Okay, the other thing I wanted to bring up and get your feedback on is O'Reilly's Auto Parts. They are anxious to go. They would really like to start construction this fall. They have been very good at really meeting all the requirements that Community Development Planning Office has placed on them with respect to the frontage improvements on Route 62, incorporation of the bus stop that was requested by MBTA, aligning their entrance with, I believe it's Eucalyptus Drive across the street. Pretty much everything that we had asked and makes sense. The problem is they're going through Caltrans review. And Caltrans, of course, says 4 to 6 weeks ago. We're now, I think, in week 8, and still no response. So one of the things that we had talked about, discussed, again, want to get your opinion on it. Normally, we would not do this, but to bring it to you for approval conditionally that they get their encroachment permit for Caltrans and meet any requirements for Caltrans.
Right.
The risk for that is, Caltrans could say no, go back to the drawing board, redesign the site. That's unlikely, given what they planned, but that's a possibility, and we've made the applicant know about that risk. But we hate to hold them up any further. Obviously, it would be great to get that kind of investment in the city and those improvements along Route 62. So this is, again, something we're throwing out to you all for consideration. If you would want to proceed, we can do that and just make a conditional approval based on a Caltrans granting an encroachment permit.
I think anything we can do to facilitate the business moving ahead. I like the idea of a conditional approval based upon Caltrans. And I think probably the risk is very low that Caltrans won't approve.
Yeah, the risk is very low.
Yeah.
It's 4 lots, so, you know,
Yeah.
technically, they have to grant an entrance off
Okay.
of Route 62. So they're proposing one off of Route 62 and one off of La Rea, again, as we had prescribed, as our city engineer had suggested, and the improvements all along Route 62. So-
No, I'm all for a conditional approval and to show the commitment of the city to this enterprise.
I am as well. Is that something we can do now, or do we bring it up on the
No,
21st?
Yeah.
it's a site plan and design approval, so we have to advertise it
Okay.
as a public hearing. And we want to bring you the full package of material, the site plan, the landscaping plan, the public improvements plans, and which they've provided a very complete package to us for their entitlement approval. So we have to do that in another step before I made that leap, but normally I would not do this because it's Caltrans. But they've been waiting very patiently, and they've been very responsive, and I would like to return the favor.
Yeah, I'd say we go ahead with that, and then hopefully by the time it comes to us, Caltrans will be back, and hopefully there'll be no issues.
I think we should proceed so long as it's very clear that this is conditional. And if Caltrans comes back and either says no or slaps them with a whole bunch of stuff, that's on them, not us.
Okay. I think they're aware of that, so.
Yeah, but yeah, let's not hold these guys up anymore.
Okay. All right, so here's my real updates here. Project Phoenix, waiting for a construction date from Edison. We've been working with Edison, Spectrum, and Frontier on all the undergrounding, working with Frontier and Spectrum to use the joint trench wherever possible. Our engineer actually did a great job by combining the 3 designs of each of the firms into one, so we could see where the mismatches were and resolve those. At this point, we're waiting on Frontier. So there's a purchase order they have to provide to Edison before they can start, but Edison's ready to go. They have their contractor selected. We just need that one final step. So hopefully by the end of the month, that will occur. But, you know, we'll see. I just wanted to explain the lack of activity there. Also making great progress on the buildings. We're almost complete with what we call design development. So that is really the point where you're down to choosing, you know, paint colors and floor tiles and bathroom fixtures and things like that. So the next step, what we're going to do is we're going to get a new cost estimate from both the engineer and the architect on both the site improvements and the buildings, make sure we're still in the target. And then after that, we proceed to construction documents.
Travis, is this for both buildings?
This-
Both the gymnasium and the
Yes,
visitor center?
visitor center,
Okay.
both structures. They're at the same phase at this point. Also want to let you know, we did this past week have interviews with housing developers for our affordable housing component, Project Phoenix. Again, that's still a requirement that we have to meet per our bond issue. You know, we went through this before with the previous developer. The numbers just did not work out. So we're looking at other potential state programs and other developers that might bring, you know, unique skill set and experience to the project. So it's not forgotten. We're still working on it, and we've started that interview process. Hopefully soon, we will start the interview process for the downtown specific plan. We had 8 submissions, which was really good. 8 really qualified firms. It's going to take a little time to go through those, but hopefully we can start those interviews in a week or 2 and get them on board and get going right away.
Any local firms?
There's some down valley that we've used. There's no local planning firms here that typically have that capability. Because we will also have to update our CEQA document as part of it. So the other thing I'll mention, and I think I mentioned it last time, we submitted a LEAP application. I remember what that acronym stands for, but basically it's another housing grant application, which will help us with the housing component, but will also give us funds to update our current general plan, to update the housing element and the safety element. We're developing a hazard mitigation plan through another grant. That kicks off a whole series of updates to our general plan, including our safety element and housing element. And so the state is providing some funding to that. And that's submitted, it's going through the review process. We'll probably know by next meeting if we've got that. That's another $150,000 in grant funds. And then the last thing I wanted to mention, some other free work that we got from San Bernardino County. They've completed the historic context statement for the city of 29 Palms. This is essentially a dissertation piece from their cultural resource person there. Really extensive, great job on the history of 29 Palms and the architecture in 29 Palms. I believe a copy was provided to the Historical Society.
They worked extensively with us. Yes.
Yeah, so a lot of great photos, a lot of great stories, a lot of great context. Like I say, this document does not have any official weight as far as, you know, us requiring buildings to go through a process, but it helps in evaluating, you know, the architectural resources that we have here in the city. So that's complete. I believe we have until August to provide comments from it. Okay, I think it's August, 1st of August. So just would really like to thank San Bernardino County for that work, and Jesse York, who was the you know, his cultural and historical resource person that worked on that, and his mentors for choosing 29, city of 29, of all the other 20-some cities in San Bernardino they could have done this for. They chose 29 Palms, so really grateful for the county for that. And that's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Just as a little aside to that, I happened to be dositing when they first came in to see if we might be interested. And I basically got down on my knees and begged them. And so they were very happy to come here.
Yeah, learned a lot out of that document.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, any questions of Travis? We have no study session. Does anybody want to stay, or shall we go home?
I move that we